be doing this? And do you think it's going to help you personally to go through all those experiences again?
Yeah, I think making the film already has helped. There's a Marine general who, probably 2 weeks ago, most Americans had never heard of, General John Allen. Now everybody knows about him, but because of a sex scandal, not because of the work he's done over the course of a 30-plus year career. And John Allen's a mentor of mine. And he once said to me, there's no excuse to not have a 5,000-year-old mind, because you can read books and learn from other people's experiences. The irony of that is I've read every great war novel growing up. You know, I read Siegfried Sassoon, I read Wilfred Owen, I read Tim O'Brien. And yet those books, even movies like Platoon, though they were brutally honest war stories, for some reason, a lot of young men like myself, we have an itch to go to war, we have an itch to experience combat. I still have it. It's that old itch that a lot of guys in this room probably know what I'm talking about. And what's interesting to me now on the other side of combat is that those stories were written as warnings to a younger generation, and yet they weren't received as such. And so I hope that maybe in some way I can take some of these awful experiences, and if you tell those stories honestly, maybe you can prevent others from making the same mistake, and then there's a way of at least feeling that there was some meaning and some purpose behind it.
Bill, you wanted to weigh in?
Yeah, two things that brought to mind by what you're saying, Zach, that I want to say about moral injury and some of the consequences of this concept. One is there's a fallacy among warfighters that there is such a thing as a moment of truth. And I joined the military because I watched war movies as a kid, and I always asked myself, gosh, could I do that, you know? And I wanted to test myself. And I know a lot of people join the military with the same kind of idea. We heard yesterday some of the Dust-Off 7-3's amazing story of success. And there are many moments of truth. But what about Dust-Off 7-2? I would like to ask them, what are they left with? And just because they got shot down, does that mean they're any less a hero? The problem with moments of truth is that there is no such thing. It's like being a poker player. In the long run, if you keep at it, if you're good, you win. But you're going to have some crappy hands, and learning how to be compassionate with yourself, forgive yourself, and move on is the challenge. And the second thing I want to say real quick is implication for families. There's a hierarchy of shame in the military in the sense that people who were not, didn't get blown up and weren't directly shot at are treated sometimes like you don't have a right to have PTS symptoms or anxiety or depression, And families forget it. You're not in harm's way. But moral injury, grief, these affect all of us all the time. You don't have to be in a war zone shooting a weapon or being shot at. And I think the more we can learn about that, the better we'll all be.
Sarah, how has moral injury affected the men and women who've served in war and their beliefs, their religious beliefs?
It's a very personal thing. Some people have deepened their relationship with God. Others have rejected the church. Lou and I were talking about this before, about creating secular, sacred spaces for folks that just really can't relate to the traditional ideas of God anymore. But I think it's up to us to tell the stories that Zach was talking about, tell our stories and tell the stories of ancient folks. Both Lou and Zach are talking about the rite of pilgrimage, very traditional sacred journey. So making that pilgrimage to the family, making the pilgrimage through Zach's story and connecting it with the stories of warriors from centuries and millennia. And I think in those ways we can help people reconnect to their own souls. And, right on the battlefield, we do that when we bring oil and water and bread and wine and things of that nature. And take people, in the hospital I would take warriors that had been together, battle buddies that felt guilty. And we would do rituals right there at the hospital bedside with a good cup of coffee, of course. And it seems to matter. And it's a mysterious way that it matters, but the soul can be mended and made bigger and more expansive and grow in love to take in more injured souls.
We're out of time, but I wonder if you want to just weigh in on a question that bothers me all the time. Knowing what we know now about the war in Iraq, knowing the circumstances that led us to go into the war in Iraq. And you've served there, you were at Fallujah. I was there in 2005 with General Abizaid when he was the U.S. military central commander. And even then, troops were saying, knowing that there were no weapons of mass destruction, knowing that the reason for going into this war was built on faulty intelligence. The question, and I'll start with Zach if you want to answer it, was it worth it?
It's an impossible question to answer. You ask, I have a lot of Kurdish friends. For them, it was worth it. For some empowered Shia, it was worth it. The relationships I built, the people I met, I wouldn't trade that for anything. At the same time, at the same time, I don't know how you can justify the bloodshed and the sacrifice. So it's not a question. I think at the end of the day, I guess it wasn't worth it. But I don't even know how you begin to answer that question.
Lou?
I asked this very same question to the Cacciatorian family, and I got mixed responses. The mother said no, it was not worth it, obviously. Nora's husband seemed to think it was. It's all about perspective, whether or not it was worth it. And it depends on where you're standing. I think that, as Zach said, it's made me who I am today. But I wouldn't want someone else to have to go through it. It's a tough question.
Sure.
Well, we do what we do, and I think it's always worth it to be present to one another and learn what we can and try to make a little more peace and a little more love. Impossible question.
Last word from Bill.
I'm close to Sarah on this. I saw very few Marines or sailors who fought for some national political gain. They fought for each other. They fought for what Robert Pressfield wrote, the two of the emotions that are way stronger than fear on the battlefield, love and honor. And those things are always worthwhile.
Can I make one other point? We're talking a lot about some pretty difficult issues, but I think it's also important for everybody to remember. One is guys that are suffering from combat stress, post-traumatic stress, whatever you want to call it, they can get better. 90% of guys that get treatment get better. And so that's one thing that we need to keep in mind. And the other thing is there's a stigma around veterans with post-traumatic stress. And I think it's important if you're hiring a vet, which is probably one of the biggest issues affecting our generation of veterans' employment. These guys are suffering because they're really good, decent people, because they hold themselves to such high standards. That makes them the type of people you want to employ, the type of people you want to be friends with. And it's not a sign of them being some sort of John Rambler type guy. In fact, it's the exact opposite. And then the other good news is that if guys have the courage to go reach out and get help, they can get better.
Let's thank our panelists. Thank them for being this evening and thank them for their service. Our next panel is very, very appropriately timed for this meeting. Diplomats in Danger. Jim Miklashevsky, my old friend from the Pentagon, will be moderating the panel. But it begins with these words. Listen closely, to the late United States Ambassador to Libya, Christie.